Now, when talking about representing data visually, it's important to recognize that there are bad ways to do this. And these are actually much more prevalent than maybe you'd expect. So we're going to talk about misleading graphs. We'll start with pictograms. A pictogram is where we draw a picture, and the size of the picture is intended to represent a frequency or the size of the values being represented. And this is slightly problematic, and let's look at this example so we can see why. A labor union might produce the graph here to show the difference between the average manager salary and the average worker salary. Now, I mentioned this when we were talking about the bars in a bar graph and how the mind actually interprets area. And so when looking at this, the mind is actually going to interpret the area of the pictures here. Okay, so the area of this manager salaries bag looks like it's about 4 times the size of the worker salaries. And so when just looking at this, that's going to be kind of the conclusion that we jump to when we see it. But we're not sure what that means because there's no legend here. There's nothing that tells us what the picture really means. And so it could have just been height. Perhaps we were just talking about the height of the bag. And if we're talking about the height of the bag, well, then this bigger bag is actually twice the size of this bag. But then also, are we looking at just the bag itself, or are we including these lines down here? It's not very clear. And so the information that this presents is probably not in line with the message people are taking from it. And so pictograms are really commonly used, and that's usually a bad thing because people are not using them in a way that's actually presenting the information in a very clear way. Another really commonly used thing that is a misleading graph is where the vertical scale is altered. So we're going to compare these two graphs. These show the exact same information, actually. This is talking about the support for same-sex marriage rights from a poll taken in December 2008. Now, just looking at the graphs without actually looking at numbers, which is what most people that are doing, if they're just glancing through information, reading quickly, skimming through news articles or whatever, they're not going to really usually look at the numbers and scales and be very careful about it. And so the graph on the left, it looks like the difference between those who support and oppose is pretty small. Obviously there is a difference, and we see that more oppose rather than support. However, on the right, you'll see that this gives the impression that opposition is much, much higher than support. However, when you look at the vertical scale, you see, opposition is actually at, it looks like 55%, and support is at 45%. That's not that huge of a difference. Here, it looks like opposition is 4 times as great as support. And that's because our vertical axis, our vertical scale has been truncated here, where our bottom here is at 40, where the bottom should be at 0 to give the clear picture that the left graph presents. Here's another example of a poorly constructed graph, and because it's poorly constructed, it's we could call it misleading because it's not really presenting good information. A poll was taken asking people if they agreed with the positions of the 4 candidates for a county office. Does this pie chart represent a good representation of the data? Explain. So looking at this, we see this pie chart, and it looks like the numbers that are presented here look like they perhaps do line up. The biggest 64 is the biggest section of the pie, and the 52 is the next, and then 42 and 35 are pretty close together. Okay, so it looks like maybe it's presenting good information. The problem, however, is that this is a pie chart, and pie charts are meant to represent the whole. And while these 4 candidates may be all the candidates, the percentages don't represent, the numbers themselves don't actually represent parts of the whole. Okay, if you were to add these all up, you're not getting 100%. And so using a pie chart for this information is a very poor decision, and it doesn't really indicate what's going on. This would be much better presented through a bar graph, maybe a Pareto chart, if you're looking for seeing ordering between the candidates.